Oh, sweetie, let me just say, the moment you see a woman in a $2,000 fuchsia blazer wading into your lake, up to her ankles in water that doesn't even belong to her, barking out legal threats like she's starring in some courtroom reality show, well, you know your little fantasy island adventure has officially hit a new level of absurdity. Private property means exactly that, private, which, apparently, is a concept a certain HOA president in designer heels just couldn't comprehend. There she was, Vivian Blackstone, which of course sounds less like a neighbor and more like the villain in a soap opera, standing right there, pointing at my family's stone cottage with a finger so manicured it could have been used as a scalpel. Pack up your little camping gear and find somewhere else to play, soldier, because this island belongs to the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, and your trespassing days are officially over. She said it so matter-of-fact, you'd think I was the one interrupting her spa weekend. Thing is, I was standing on property that's been in my family for 60 years, looking at this overdressed stranger splashing through water she didn't own, ordering me around about land she'd never so much as raked a leaf on. And all I could think about was my grandfather, Edmund, and how he probably would have handled this circus with a whole lot more patience than I was feeling right then. The sun caught her suit in such a way, she looked like some runaway from a fashion magazine. If the magazine was running a feature called Hostile Takeovers and How to Accessorize Them. Behind her, 3 board members huddled up on the shore, clutching clipboards like shields, trying to look official while their folders wilted in the lake humidity, obviously hoping Vivian would do the dirty work so they could keep their hands clean. Mrs. Blackstone, I said as evenly as I could manage, I think there might be some confusion about property boundaries here. Vivian let out a laugh, so sharp it could strip paint. Confusion? Oh, honey, the only confusion here is whatever fairy tale some slick real estate scammer sold you about owning this island. Willowbrook Estates, HOA, has managed this entire lake system since 1985, including every square inch you're standing on. You had to admire her confidence. She was the kind of person who probably scheduled her neighbor's lawn mowing and issued fines for crooked mailbox flags. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in my grandfather's old cottage was a waterproof case, filled with documents just waiting to turn their little 40-year land grab into the most expensive mistake of their lives. Let me back up a sec. 3 months ago, I inherited something I never even dreamed about, a 2.3-acre island in the middle of Lake Willowbrook, complete with a 19th century stone cottage straight out of postcard, and apparently a 40-year-old property dispute that nobody thought to mention during probate. My grandfather Edmund, an Army Corps of Engineers surveyor, had used the place as his private retreat since 1963, back when the whole area was farmland and HOAs were just a bad idea waiting to be invented. He was a perfectionist, measured everything twice, documented it 3 times, which made it a little weird that he'd left me GPS coordinates that were always exactly 3 meters off from every county map I checked. The inheritance came with a handwritten note. Mason, precision matters more than people realize. Well, it's like an error today, might be an insurance policy tomorrow. Check the basement workshop. Everything you need is waiting there. At the time, I thought it was just some sentimental advice about tools or old clocks. I had no clue he'd left me a legal bombshell. The first sign of trouble came just 2 days before Vivian's lakeside drama. I was on the porch, coffee in hand, finally feeling peaceful after my military discharge, when I saw their pontoon boat approach, decorated like someone with too much money and not enough taste to try to impress a yacht club. Vivian in her signature fuchsia, backed by her board. Cordelia Farweather, the treasurer, clipboard practically welded to her wrist. Prudence Hartwell, the secretary, with a voice like shattered glass. And Sterling Whitlock, the lone male, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Morning, sweetie," Vivian called out, voice so sugary I nearly got a cavity. "Hope you enjoyed your little camping adventure, because vacation time is officially over." They docked like they owned the place, Vivian stepping off first, inspecting everything with the air of a conquering general, her heels sinking into the sand, cataloging my cottage as if she was about to list it on Zillow. She ran her finger along the stone wall. Edmund kept this place in better condition than I expected. Shame he never understood the value of community cooperation. That's when I realized this wasn't a neighborly visit. It was reconnaissance. They were plotting something big. Mrs. Blackstone, I tried again. This is private property. You don't have permission to be here. Prudence laughed, a sound like a fork in a garbage disposal. Permission? Sweetie, we don't need permission. The HOA has authority over all community water resources, including your little island. She whipped out a laminated document, waved it around like it was a wand. Official letterhead, big words, all designed to intimidate. But as a guy who's read enough military paperwork to spot a forgery at 100 yards, I noticed the font was off and the legalese seemed patchy. Cordelia unrolled what she claimed was a site plan. It looked more like a kid's treasure map. Section 12B establishes HOA oversight over all water-based recreation within Willowbrook boundaries. I had to hand it to them. The terminology was impressive. Lustron Recreational Zone. Really just code for stuff we want to control. It was all a show, and they delivered it with such conviction that you could see how most folks would have caved. This is fascinating, I said, pulling out the real deal. The federal property deed, worth nearly $1 million. You might want to compare your map to the actual federal survey. Suddenly, even Sterling looked interested. I unfolded my grandfather's original 1963 survey, GPS, property boundaries, all of it. You could see the first crack in their wall of confidence. Vivian's eyes narrowed. Cordelia started rifling through her paperwork, desperate to find something, anything, to counter what I had. The meeting ended with them retreating to their boat, but not before Vivian tossed out one last threat. This conversation is far from over, Mr. Garrett. The HOA protects its interests very seriously. And wouldn't you know it, the next morning my island was decorated with professional no trespassing HOA property signs, each one gleaming like a trophy in the sun, planted in all the right places by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The audacity was stunning. They basically declared war using my own land. But here's where my grandfather's insurance policy came in. His basement workshop was a shrine to precision. Surveying gear, blueprints, steel markers, all perfectly organized. And there, in a hidden compartment behind some loose bricks, I found it, 18 months of certified mail receipts, bank statements, property tax records, county correspondence, and, here's the kicker, original development plans showing the lake and island were explicitly excluded from any HOA authority. Turns out, for decades, the HOA had been collecting money and flexing control over land they never owned. My island, the causeway, even the docks, they were all on my property according to military-grade surveys my grandfather had kept secret just in case. That's when the calls started. Bradford Hutchkins, representing Lakefront Management Services, a shell company for the HOA, called to threaten legal action if I restricted community access. He tried every trick, legal jargon, warnings about established precedent, hinting at six-figure damages. I let him talk, took notes, then told him, funny, I'm looking at federal survey documentation that suggests the boundaries aren't as clear as you think. Army Corps of Engineers stuff. Would you like to see it? Suddenly, his tone changed, from threats to talk of compromise. I told him, sure, let's review all relevant surveys before deciding anything. On Friday, federal surveyors showed up, Janet Brennan and Thomas Keller, armed with GPS units and ground-penetrating radar. Vivian and Bradford watched from the mainland, flanked by a suited lawyer who looked like he billed by the minute. We're just verifying coordinates, Brennan called out, totally unfazed by Vivian's protests about established community management. 30 minutes later, Keller announced, significant variance from county boundaries. Causeway and 40 meters of common space are within your property. The silence was stunning. Even the birds seemed to stop and listen. Vivian's face drained of color. Cordelia dropped her clipboard, papers flying. Bradford was frantically dialing his attorney. That's impossible, Vivian sputtered. We've maintained the causeway for decades. Maintaining someone else's land doesn't make it yours, I replied, channeling my grandfather's dry wit. It just makes you very helpful neighbors. That evening, I filed an official property access restriction notice with the county and feds. As of 6 p.m., any unauthorized use of my land was a federal trespassing violation. The next day, the HOA showed up with a flotilla, cameras rolling, ready to present community solidarity. Vivian, now in a Navy suit, announced they'd refuse to accept the survey. Bradford tried to hand me an easement agreement, appropriate compensation, continued lake access, formal compromise. I held up the legal notice. As of last night, access is restricted. Federal law applies. The silence after that was heavy, broken only by Cordelia's panicked shriek. You can't just cut off lake access. People have been using that causeway for 40 years. Patterns of behavior aren't the same as legal ownership, I said, letting my grandfather's legacy finally speak for itself. The fallout was immediate. By Monday, I was in a county conference room with all the key players, plus a mediator named Rebecca Morrison. The federal survey was projected on the wall, 3.7 meters variance, causeway and common space included in my deed. Vivian's voice was barely a whisper. The HOA lawyers tried to argue community investment and establish precedent, but my grandfather had already anticipated that, too. His files included proof of inflated bills, fake contractors, money funneled to board members' relatives. When Rebecca reviewed the evidence, her face said it all. Within days, Vivian resigned, their high-powered law firm dropped them, and the HOA's last stronghold of intimidation crumbled. At the next community meeting, the biggest in Willowbrook history, I stood up agreement in hand. I have no interest in cutting off the lake, but any future access must acknowledge real property boundaries, include transparent financial management, and protect the environment. We do this together, or not at all. The residents, many of whom had hated Vivian's reign but never dared say so, erupted in support. We created a new, democratic management structure with open voting, clear rules, and real accountability. Sterling was elected coordinator, monthly financial reports became standard, and lake quality actually improved. Maintenance costs dropped by a third. People started trusting each other again. By the next year's anniversary, Willowbrook was unrecognizable. A real community, not just a cluster of homes with a dictator in a fuchsia blazer. Vivian had moved to Arizona. Cordelia and Prudence were gone. The new sign on the causeway reads, Willowbrook Lake Community Access. Please respect environmental guidelines. My grandfather's workshop is still there, survey gear and all, with my own files added for future generations. So, let me ask you, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you have fought, folded, or found a way to build something better? Ever tangled with an HOA or neighborhood authority that thought the law didn't apply to them? Drop your stories in the comments. I'd love to hear them. And if you think Edmund was a genius or just really stubborn, give me a thumbs up. If you think the HOA should have known better, drop a fire emoji. Thanks for sticking with me through this wild ride. From lake battles and legal threats to actual community transformation. Subscribe for more stories where precision and people collide. And remember, always double-check your boundaries, because sometimes the difference between being pushed around and building something lasting is just 3 meters of honest-to-God precision.